Also, check out this week's LessWrong posts.
Yes.
Start with the Savanna Poets.
This one starts off with sort of an improvised poem from Richard Feynman's writings. Do you want to read it since you were our poem reader?
I'm the poem reader?
You were the last time
I think I did my turn
poems.
then. You go for it.
Oh, God, I don't want to read poetry. I'm bad at it. All right. Poets say science takes away from the beauty of the stars, mere globs of gas atoms. Nothing is mere. I, too, can see the stars on a desert night and feel them. But do I see less or more?
For far more marvelous is the truth than any artist of the past imagined. Why do the poets of the present not speak of it? What men are poets who can speak of Jupiter if he were like a man, but if he is an immense spinning sphere of methane and ammonia, must be silent? Feynman was so fucking cool.
Yeah, it's taken from Feynman Lectures on Physics, Volume 1, pages 3 through 6. The post starts off with that, and then Eliezer says that last question there, like, who are these poets that can speak of Jupiter like a man, but not like a gas ball? What's up with them? He says, I think that's an actual legit question that you can answer. And the answer is that if Jupiter is like us, he can fall in love and lose love and regain love. He can laugh and weep. If Jupiter is an immense spinning sphere of methane and ammonia, it is more difficult for the poet to make us feel. Which kind of sounds like he's saying this is a skill issue, poets.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I like that phrasing. It is more difficult. You can't say, and Jupiter shared your struggles or whatever, but man, you can talk beautifully about stuff in science. I refer again to Richard Dawkins, not just on Weaving Rainbow, but in The Greatest Show on Earth, his book on here's evolution in 300 and change pages. You can just feel the love and magic and majesty and poetry coming through it.
That's awesome.
And since I'm not a poet, I can't put this in a poetic way without putting in more effort. But there's an amazing beauty to the fact that I share literal cousinship with the fruits I had for breakfast.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I can describe the fruits as their color or whatever, and that's something. But to think that we're actually related, not just everything on Earth is connected, man. But if we go back far enough, we shared a parent. That is to me just one of the most remarkable facts that humanity has in our bucket of facts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there are people that can actually do this.
Yeah.
In the post, Eliezer says, the biblical story of the rainbow is a tale of bloodthirsty murder and smiling insanity. How could anything about raindrops and refraction properly replace that? Raindrops don't scream when they die. So science takes the romance away, says the romantic poet, and what you are given back never matches the drama of the original, even if you do know the equations, because the equations are not about strong emotions.
Yeah, and if the equations aren't about strong emotions, it doesn't mean they can't evoke them.
Yeah.
Right? If I had more of an intuitive feeling of physics than I do of biology, I'm sure there's things in physics that would that could move me in the same way. There's almost a physics pun in there somewhere.
They could apply enough force to you.
Exactly.
Okay. This part I thought was really inspiring and harkens back immediately to Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, in my mind. He says, it's not necessary for Jupiter to be like a human because humans are like humans. If Jupiter is an immense spinning sphere of methane and ammonia, that doesn't mean that love and hate are emptied from the universe. There are still loving and hating minds in the universe. Us.
Yeah.
Damn good point.
I guess the reason one would hold up Jupiter as an example is for the same reason one would hold up any fictional character, because that way, you can attribute whatever you want to them and they can have whatever story you want. Mm-hmm. But just make it a fictional human or a fictional whatever. But the fact, that shiny spot in the sky is a ball of gas and not somehow also a human-shaped person with, thoughts and feelings, that doesn't make our thoughts and feelings any less interesting. If anything, it makes them more compelling because they're just here. Yeah. Right?
I don't know. It's a different world aesthetic if everything is has some sort of intentionality, emotional drive to it. Is it Shintoism that believes every object has some sort of animating spirit?
Yeah, it might be in Shintoism. And yeah, there's something to that.
It definitely feels like a different world if everything has some kind of spark of magic in it, right? So I can kind of see being sad to learn that that's not the case, but
it's a different kind of magic, though, right? Jupiter being the thing that it is. Actually, the next sentence in here is perfect. With more than 6 billion of us at the last count, this was published ages ago. Mm-hmm. With more than 8 billion of us at the last count, does Jupiter really need to be on the list of potential protagonists?
Yeah.
I think that we've got lots of examples and all of our fictional examples. we don't necessarily need to say, well, also that shiny spot in the sky. But I understand there's a kind of a cool thing of like, oh yeah, there's this innate energy to everything that gives it, everything wants, like water doesn't move downhill because of gravity, it moves because it wants to.
Right, yeah.
Like, I get that, but we talked about rainbows last time, and, rainbows are there not because they want to be there, but it doesn't make them any less cool. Maybe it makes them less cool in that one specific regard. If you believe that they were there because the sky was happy or something, and it's like, oh, the sky's not really happy, but it sure looks happy, I
think there's also something to having gods or mythical figures that are like archetypes that are just the complete personification and encapsulation of a particular emotion or a particular mood that it's different from talking about a real human.
Yeah, but you do that with protagonists of story. Achilles, the embodiment of anger and, I guess, action, maybe. All the...
Of being a whiny bitch.
Right, that too. There's all... Your mind is the limit as far as inventing those characters. I prefer to live in this universe rather than a universe where there are actually capricious gods with all of their whims and powers and seemingly random bouts of mass destruction, right?
Yeah.
So
Ooh, it'd be more fun if we had AIs that we trained to be archetypes, although also very dangerous. So
I'll give it 6 months.
Okay. Going to your point here, Elias also says, if you write of Jupiter as though it were a human, then you are making our map of the universe just a little more impoverished of complexity. You are forcing Jupiter into the mold of all the stories that have already been told on Earth.
Yeah.
And he ends with this, which is just massive call out. He says, Richard Feynman asked, what men are poets who can speak of Jupiter if he were like a man, but if he is an immense spinning sphere of methane and ammonia must be silent? Eliezer answers, they are Savanna Poets, who can only tell stories that would have made sense around a campfire 10,000 years ago. Savanna Poets, who can tell only the great stories in their classic forms and nothing more.
Take that, peasants.
Yeah. Level up your fucking poetry game.
It's interesting. It wasn't until you primed me to look at this as like throwing shade that I took it that way. I took it merely as like descriptive, I think, on previous readings. Yeah. But it is kind of a diss. And it's like, yeah, people with small imaginations can do that. And those, or have to do that rather, right?
Yeah. Although they would argue with us about that.
The Savanna Poets, you think?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure Keats was probably a genius. So he has a different aesthetic, and he would argue that it's not an impoverishment of his mind. Maybe he has just a different utility function than we do, to borrow the rationalist phrase.
Could be.
But I really see Eliezer's point. Like, Keats, if you wanted to, you could put your mind to this. You're a freaking genius. You could find the way to invoke all the emotions without depending on mysticism and ignorance and things that literally don't exist.
I agree. I like that a lot. And it leads really well into the next post, which is kind of like a short summary of this one.
Yeah.
But it hits on one of the notes that Feynman touched on. Make sure he drives this home. And this is the thing. This was the one I didn't have to reread, but I did anyway because it's fun.
Yeah.
But this is the one I remember from the first time reading it.
Me too. This is one of the ones that just sticks in your mind forever.
Joy in the merely real.
Mm-hmm.
And it again starts with John Keats's Lamia about the catalog of, dull things and science, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And then, Feynman, just nothing is mere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because it says, do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy. And nothing is mere. And I always add that in my head, that nothing is just. If someone's using the word, oh, just do this, just is usually doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because if you say do this, people don't do that. People don't say do this when there's like this hard, complicated, unknown step in the middle. They say just do that when they're in my experience.
Yeah.
If I looked out, for next usages of people doing that, I'm probably find some counterexamples. But in my quick assessment, I think Dan Dennett had one that was like, if someone says certainly, then it's like, no, it's not.
Okay.
Certainly it's true. Then he's like, no, that's a red flag. It's not then. If they have to say certainly.
Yeah. I have if someone ever says trust me, that is a red flag that I should probably not trust them right then.
Right. Yudkowsky opens this one wonderfully. You've got to admire that phrase, dull catalog of common things. What is it exactly that goes in this catalog? Besides rainbows, that is.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Things that are mundane. Normal things. Unmagical things. Things that are known or knowable. things that play by rules or play by any rules, which makes them boring. Things that are part of the ordinary universe. Things that are, in a word, real.
Uh-oh. Yeah, because now that's what I call setting yourself up for a fall. At that rate, sooner or later, you're going to be disappointed in everything. Either it will turn out not to exist, or, even worse, it will turn out to be real.
Yeah, if you can't find joy in the merely real, you're doomed.
Yeah. Just continuing on, he says, nothing is inherently mysterious, so to worship a phenomenon because it seems so wonderfully mysterious is to worship your own ignorance.
Yeah, this is, links back to mysterious answers to mysterious questions. That's one of my favorite takeaways from my first time reading this, in my early 20s, was just like, and this came hot on the heels of, again, that harkens back to the new atheist arguments that are going on at the time, but the God of the gaps kind of style of argument that, well, sure, you've explained this, but now what about this? Mm-hmm. Or the other gaps would also be like fossil record. Well, sure, you found the missing link, but now you've made two more on either side of it. The God of the gaps in our knowledge was their thing, right? Mm-hmm. And worshiping that gap rather than looking at it seems like it's a different preference that some people have and not one that I share.
And it's dangerous. People are going to keep filling in those gaps.
However they want, too.
Yeah. I like how this ends because it is what is the word for a praising of?
Celebrating?
Okay, celebrating. Yeah. It is a celebration of my heroes, the type of people I admire. He says earlier, if we cannot take joy in things that are merely real, our lives will always be empty. And then ends with, this puts quite a different complexion on the bizarre habit indulged by those strange folk called scientists, wherein they suddenly become fascinated by pocket lint or bird droppings or rainbows, or some other ordinary thing which world-weary and sophisticated folk would never give a second glance. You might say that scientists, at least some scientists, are those folk who are, in principle, capable of enjoying life in the real universe.
Well put.
Yeah.
No notes. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
I remember I find less things interesting now than I used to. And the Fascination Lottery that Scott Alexander has written about is a great way to think of this sort of thing. I like the people who are fascinated by the real world and who just want to dig more into it. And especially because, as Eliezer says, since the real world is all that exists, these people are going to have the happiest and most fulfilling lives in the end, because they can enjoy real life. But yeah, I do see a lot of that, like people who consider themselves sophisticated are like, I'm above being interested in bugs and shit.
Yeah, I've noticed this too, and I turned that off as soon as I noticed it in myself to the best that I can. And it's a continuous, if I could use a language from Worth the Candle, it's a continuous tweaking of my soul to curb the thing. If anyone's hyped on something, and it seems like there's something about that seems like, oh, that's low brow, that's low class to be like super into whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's like, real sophisticants aren't into stuff. We just take things in, or we appreciate things, but to be like, hyped on something, that's mundane or whatever. Mm-hmm. I try to shut that shit down in my head if it ever tries to rear its head, because enjoying things is awesome. Yeah. And I never want to harsh someone else's buzz or have them harsh mine. Right. I watched the movie Anyone But You with Sydney Sweeney and some other handsome guy. It's a rom-com. The thing in rom-coms that I find them so typically unenjoyable. So like I find the things in them that I can enjoy, but they have the same recipe. Mm-hmm, the couple meets, they have some super easy to resolve misunderstanding that they don't talk about, and that leads to this huge problem. And then that's the whole thing. And then at the end of Act 2, it looks like things are going well. Then there's another misunderstanding, and then at the end, it's like either they get together or maybe they will, and that's how that's the whole thing. Yeah. And I realized that reducing it to that recipe, someone could do the same thing for my favorite treasured genre of movies, and they'd be exactly as right as I am about categorizing rom-coms. So like, I'm not going to shit on someone who likes these things. It's just not typically my cup of tea, but I'll find things in them that I can enjoy. Like I try to with everything.
It's kind of silly, but like sex is the same way if you think about it. It doesn't vary that radically, and yet it's enjoyable every single time you do it.
I mean,
okay, not every single time you do it.
Well, there's that, but also like there's a difference between like, I mean, yes, if you zoom out far enough, I guess I'm considering like different just genres of things to enjoy. I don't know anyone who would be like, I don't know, physical pleasures. I guess if someone was like a super hedonist, would that fall into the same bucket as somebody who's really into Marvel movies?
Is there a difference between these two pictures?
I guess one's masturbating while watching the one's not, right? So, but yeah, no, I see what you're saying. And another Worth the Candle reference. You mentioned about finding, fascination with fewer things. And I'm listening to the first time, but rereading through listening the audiobook. And when he's first trying to connect with the six-eyed doe, he sits there and like talks out loud and about the fact that he used to be like fascinated by things like trees and grass, and he tries to trigger that feeling, and he used to be able to a little easier when he was younger before he was depressed, and then he triggers it for a minute. We can do that all the time. But it takes work.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to say, that I find this happens much less to me now than when I was younger. I feel like scientists are the ones who have the eternally young brains where they're always curious like that. And I am still, like, now I've gone on to be much more curious about humans and their relationships and their inner lives. And this has been a wonderful experience, but also I kind of feel like that's the most normie thing to be interested in the world.
If you're coming at it with your unique lens, though, you can still. Plus, even if it is, who cares? Not everyone is as interested in other people as you are, maybe, and that is something to make note of. But also, even if it was like the world's most common interest, doesn't make it less interesting.
Yes. I see sometimes people who are like really into Beatles or whatever, and I'm like, how is that possible? And yet I still kind of remember back in the past when I found a special sub-fascination like that and was just all about that for a few months.
Yeah, I try to pour kerosene on those sparks whenever I find them. But yeah, finding like that fascination with the mundane things that I see every day, it does take a specific mindset.
Is it literally just brain chemistry? You think if we get into the post-human future, we can alter ourselves to find that sort of childish wonder, pleasure in all sorts of things? Because I think it's just a better way to exist, to be totally honest.
I mean, speaking of brain chemistry, you can induce this with some small amounts of some chemical compounds.
And I sometimes do.
And you'll find suddenly clouds are way more interesting than they've ever been in your entire life, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you can't really focus on what makes them interesting, they're still fascinating, right? Maybe there's a middle there where you can trigger the interesting part, but the ability to stay coherent part stays intact. I think that's doable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's doable through not just future sci-fi medicine, but I think through some forms of meditation and metta, the loving kindness meditation, where you focus on the feeling of love that you have for something or somebody, and then just hold on to that feeling. Oh. And then you can orient that towards other things, whether it be other people, humanity at large. I was listening to somebody on some podcast years ago talk about it, and she said the thing that she found most difficult was pointing at herself. Mm. That was she could love Hitler before she could love herself. Wow. With that feeling, because I've practiced this a little bit, and it is kind of like holding water in your hands, and then once it slips, you're like, oh, let me go back to my focal point of, okay, that's the feeling of love again now, and let me hold on to that again and carry it around. I'm definitely not the biggest fan of myself, but I would have a harder time loving Hitler, I gotta say. I can't remember if she said Hitler or not, but she did say she was last. Maybe it's because she knows herself the best, and she knows all of her flaws or something, where, you can paint a picture of what makes, let's not use Hitler, some asshole, what makes them lovable. But for yourself, you're like, I have all these problems. But it's like, they do too. You just don't see them. Anyway, I think that you can kind of foster and nurture that sense. It disappointingly takes effort. I do wonder, we keep saying scientists. Every scientist that I've not every scientist, the ones that I work with that I've seen on a semi-regular basis are bored as shit. They're not all Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan and Richard Feynman, right? He did say some scientists. Yeah. I think the science communicators, the ones that love science, but the other ones, they're there because they love it. Mm-hmm. I've been doing twin studies for over 30 years. And as far back as I can remember, it's the same person coordinating them. Oh, wow. And I don't know if she's been doing them all 30 years, but at least for the last 20. Mm. She never seems that interested, but she must like it because she's still doing it. Whether or not her joy is present in every moment of the super, super boring tests that she gets to proctor, that's not really the point. I think that she's enjoying the project that she's contributing to, right? Mm. Anyway, great stuff. And yes. You mentioned Scott Alexander's The Lottery of Fascinations. I don't know if I've read this one, so I'm going to read it and we'll put it in the show notes. Oh, it's really good. Well, for next week. Speaking of looking for things to be happy about, Joy in Discovery is our first one. Yep.
And the second one will be bind yourself to reality.
All right.
Sounds kinky.
I'm sure that's what he's going for.
Absolutely.